All right, so in exercise one, we talked about the component, the tracked pose driver, and basically how it uses eyes to, when you move around your eyes or even your neck, the device can correspond based on that. Now we're going to build basically, we're going to build something called an XR rig, okay? And what an XR rig is when you're in a virtual world, you have to, there's your placement within the world, right? So if I have this world here, which is, a simple world with some, I have some pyramids and such. It's like, well, where is my character within this world? Am I here? Am I there? Am I here? Right. And so the XR rig represents the player or the user, but it's also all of the input information that the user is going to do. So for instance, like moving my head or moving my eyes, or maybe there are controllers, or maybe like even I might have, this is a more advanced kind of thing that we're not doing in this class. It may even be something like I have a special glove that is taking in data from, my glove, or maybe there's some sensors on my body or something like that that's taking in additional information. Okay. So you got to remember when we were dealing with like video games, it's like, you have you have input like, keys on your keyboard or a mouse. Obviously in VR we don't really have that, or at least not in this particular setup. We have controllers, we have headsets. In a more advanced system, you may have some more sensors, and so that's the information we're taking in. So the XR rig represents the player, I'll call it, or the user, and handles what the player sees and input from the player. Okay. So what we're going to do in this one is this lab is we're going to build a very, very basic XR rig. Okay. Not in this module, but next module, we'll go over how to do more, like build an entire rig from scratch with with a lot of sensors and whatnot. In this one, what we're going to do is we're going to build an XR rig that lets us look around at our scene here. Oops, I don't have a camera, but when we get a camera, we'll be able to like move around, but also move forward, backwards, left, and right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we're going to build a rig. Now, I could do this. I could build an empty, and I could call this VR headset. And I could add another empty, and we're going to call this one camera offset. Okay. The reason why we have a camera offset is sometimes we're going to want to move items that if you apply them directly to the headset, to the main body, it's hard to move them. But if you set it to an offset, you can kind of reposition them a little bit. And then I might want to add a camera. Okay. This camera is going to be my camera that my user is going to look through like that. Okay. And, we could play around with all the various, settings we've done in terms of the player and whatnot. I'm going to move that camera back. Okay. Now, what I would then want to do is in the last one, we added a tracked pose. So I could come in here and I could do track pose driver. It's tracked pose driver input system. And I could come in here and just like in the last one, I could bind this to, I'm adding in the binding. This is going to allow me to take an XR HMD or a head mounted display. This means, that's what this is. Oops, not other, but this one. And I'm going to do the center eyes and the same for rotation. Let's do that. HMD. That's rotation, right? Now, I could do that, but actually, I'm going to show you guys a quicker way to do this. There's actually some built-in things we can use. I'm going to go to the game object and I'm going to go to XR, which is for VR kind of related stuff. This should have been added when you installed the XR interactive, uh, what's the word? Package manager or package. And I'm going to go down to where it says XR origin. And what that actually does is you'll actually see it builds this empty that has another empty with a camera offset, and then it has a camera attached to it. And if you look, you'll notice the camera already has the track pose driver, and it's already doing the rotation and position, and it's already set up the eyes and whatnot. It's even got a couple extra things that we didn't talk about, but it's basically tracking the position of the headset itself. Now, it also added something, if you click on the main one, it actually also added a couple of scripts, and these are scripts that I could have found myself. Like, for instance, if I didn't have an XR origin, you could have typed in the word XR origin, and that would have been added as such. Okay. What an XR origin is your XR origin is where your character exists in the scene. Okay. So think of this as like, this is the placement. Like if I had a character, if I had a model, let's say it's a cube, and I say, okay, this cube represents the player, the position of that cube, that's where the player is in relationship to all the other stuff in the game, right? Well, your XR is basically that. Where is your character in relationship to the rest of the world? And that's what the script is about. You want to make sure under origin-based game object that it's set to your actual origin, to your XR origin, okay? They call it an XR origin if you go through this. I find that kind of confusing, so I usually, because it's like, well, are we talking about the rig, or are we talking about the script? So I usually kind of call this VR headset. It's kind of like, what does this represent? It's the VR headset. And just make sure that this updates. I'm going to want to set camera floor. If you have an offset, which I do, I'm going to put that into here. And then the camera is what is the camera that the user is going to use. And that's going to be main camera. And I'm going to put that into there under camera. Okay. Next, you're going to see tracking origin mode. And it says floor or device. Floor means like when you figure out how tall your object is, it goes from the floor of the world. So like when you guys set up your Oculus, you may have remembered those little purple plus signs that represent where the floor is. So it can figure out the relationship. Device means it's based on the size of the device. I usually recommend using floor. Okay. It also added this thing called Input Action Manager. Okay. What that does is this is going to handle input from the user. Okay. And really what it means is it's going to try to get in data from our controllers. Okay. Now, if I was doing this from scratch and, what I could have done is when you add an input manager, let's just hypothetically say I deleted it. I need to add one in. Let's do an input action manager. I want to define the various keys. And so we could write a script that does that, but that's a lot of work. Instead, what I would really recommend is if you guys downloaded that package that I asked you to do from I'm going to go to my package manager. And I asked you guys to go to your XR input toolkit. Under samples, there should have been something called starter kit. If you went into your starter kit, which I'll scroll down. Where is it under? Assets, samples, XR interaction toolkit. This is my current version, 3.07. There should have been something that says XR default input actions. And what this does is it basically sets up having buttons, okay? Because before we can even like program anything, we got to have buttons that we can, like right now it's like, okay, well, I'm pressing this key or I'm pressing this little joystick, right? What does that do? And so we even have to have code that basically says, okay, here are these buttons. These are what the buttons do. And that's what this is, okay? So what I'm actually going to use is that default XR inputs. That basically is bunch of code, so we don't have to spend a lot of time doing this. I mean, we could do this 100% from scratch, but I don't think you guys really want to do that. This is basically allowing you to take the buttons that are programmed in on this, or that exist, I should say, and add code to them so that they can correspond. You know, if I press a button, it corresponds to something. Okay. All right. You should also have something called the XR Interaction Manager. This script basically affects the input that the user does, but also the results of the world in relationship to the XR origin. So like if something were to happen to this, like it collides with it, we'd want to, have that. So that's what this particular script does. It's usually kept on a separate empty. It doesn't have to be on the same as this. Usually it's a good idea to keep it separate if you're doing it from scratch. If you do the XR origin that I did, it actually automatically built that for me. So that's another reason. I just recommend using that. It's a good setup. The next thing is, and this is very important, is we want to set up our controllers, okay? And what I'm going to do is with the headset rig highlighted, or my XR rig, I'm going to click on this and make an empty. And I want this to be kind of on the same level as my camera offset. Okay, and I'm going to call this locomotion. Oops. So if I were to save and preview my world, I'd be able to like look around like we did in exercise 1. I'd be able to turn my head and everything, but I wouldn't be able to move. Okay. And the reason why is we have to set up some scripts that will basically allow my character to move forward, backwards, left, and right, but also allow them to turn, or at least make it easier to turn than having to physically turn your head. Okay. To do that, we need to use another script called the locomotion script. Like it sounds like, locomotion allows the XR rig to move and to turn. Okay. When you do this, I really recommend that you put it on a separate empty. And the reason why is when we add a locomotion script, it has to be the parent of when we start to do the controllers. So it's just easier to have these kind of on their own thing. So what I'm going to do is with locomotion, I could go all of these packages, by the way, you could find. So if I went under interaction toolkit, runtime, locomotion, I could add a locomotion mediator and just drag it to it like this. Or like this, I suppose. Another way to do this is, I'm just going to remove it. Oops, not the transform, but this one. I have to remove this one first. What I'm going to do is just type in locomotion. Now you'll notice I get a locomotion mediator and a locomotion system. Locomotion system is the old way, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but you really should use the mediator. That's the newer version. So I'm going to use that one. Now, when I do that, it adds a script, and I also get this thing called the XR body transformer. So the locomotion mediator allows my character to move. It's going to add this other one, the XR body transformer. Its job is to basically dictate the, what's the word? The constraints of what the character can do. So in other words, like, can the character walk through walls and things like that? We'll talk about that in things like colliders and things like that. We'll get back to this one in a second. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a empty, and I'm going to call this, this is to let my characters move. I'm going to add this one, and it has to be the child of the element that has the locomotion applied to it, the locomotion mediator. I'm going to call this move and turn. Okay. And I'm going to add this to this as a subset of this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a component that's going to let my character move. And we're going to use one of our controllers to move the character. So the way I'm going to do that, I could go under continuous, where is it? Continuous move provider, which is under XR toolkit, runtime, locomotion, movement. But what I'm going to do is simply, I'm going to click on this one and I'm going to use the component and I'm going to use the search feature again because it's faster. And I'm going to type in continuous move provider. Make sure you're using the regular one, not the one that says action or device based. Those are older scripts that are a little different. I don't want to get too deep into it. All right, and the main thing here is under mediator, we want to put in locomotion because that's the element that's storing our mediator. The other thing that we want to make sure of is forward source means what is actually, like, if when I press the button, which is going to be the, the little joystick, what's actually going to move? And the answer is, well, the thing I actually want to move is the camera, the main camera. So I want to put that into here. Okay, so in other words, if I move forward, the camera, which is here, should move forward. All right. Now, the other thing that's happening here is when we set up the interaction manager, the input action manager, and I dropped this in, it kind of put some default buttons that the Oculus Quest has. So for instance, you'll notice here it says left hand, right hand input, and it says left locomotion, right locomotion. So what this would actually do is you'd be able to use either one of these are kind of pre-built code, and I'd be able to use either one of the joysticks to move, left, right, forward, or backwards. I don't want to use both, and the reason why is we're actually going to set one of the controllers to be the turn. I usually recommend making the the move the left one and the turn the right, but you could do it either way. Just choose whichever one you want to do. You don't want them overlapping each other, and the reason why is that the turning and the moving both use the joystick. So if you set both of them to the joystick, it can't do both at the same time. It's going to end up choosing the last one. So I'm going to set this to, let's pretend that this wasn't already set. I want to make sure, I want to just do the left hand or the left controller, and I would choose XR left, which means left controller, and then which button or action do we want it to do? The action we want it to do would to be move under locomotion. So, that's the one I'm going to use. And then that's what's going to happen. If you were to save and preview, you'd be able to move left, forward, right, or forward, backwards, left, or right by using the left controller. You would not be able to turn your head. I mean, you could turn your head, but what we want to do is, like, right now, you'd only be able to turn your head by physically moving your own head. And that could be a pain, especially if I had to turn all the way around and you weren't on a swivel chair. So what we could do is I'm going to add another component, and it's called continuous turn. Oops, I did the same one again. It's continuous turn provider. Okay. What this would allow you to do is by hitting the joystick, you would be able to rotate the camera for you without having to physically move your head. This is really good in worlds where it's like you want to turn around, but you don't want to have to physically turn around because it's just a pain in the butt or you're in a physically limited area. So I'm going to do this one. I'm going to do locomotion. So just like that, we have to set the locomotion. Once again, this has to be the child of the element that has the mediator applied. And then once again, this is how quickly you'll turn. You can make this faster or slower. And once again, you can see that the turning is based on the left and right controllers. I don't really want both of them because once again, if I had this be both and then this one, this would actually this would overwrite this because you can't have two actions to the same controller from the same input essentially. So what I'm going to do is turn this one off. If this happened to not be set automatically, what I would have to do is click, and this one is my right controller. and I would want to set this to turn. Okay. Continuous turn means that you'll move 1 degree at a time. Another one you could do is called the snap turn provider. Snap turn, what snap turn will do is rather than use the rather than go 1 degree at a time, it would go 45 degrees at a time. It's actually right here how much you're turning. That's why it's called a snap, because it's like boom, 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 boom. I think actually when you guys were in Frame VR, that was kind of the default. And once again, it's like you would set which one you'd want to do. Let's say it was the right hand. I would go right and use snap turn. Now, once again, I have these two different things. This would be bad because basically I'm trying to do two different actions using the same button, and that's confusing to the computer. So I'd really only want to do one or the other. I typically prefer continuous. Some people like snap. It's really up to you which one you'd want to use. I'm just going to remove this one. Some people say that you get less sick if you use the snap one. I don't know if that's true or not. I kind of find it exactly the same personally. All right, there's one more thing we want to do. Now, if I were to publish this, if I publish this, you would be able to move around like forward, backwards, left, and right. You'd also be able to use the controller to turn, but you'd kind of float and you'd actually not collide with anything. So if you move through this world, what would happen is essentially, if you were to move through this world, what would happen is you would kind of literally float, or you wouldn't collide with any of these objects. I want to be able to collide because otherwise we just kind of work like a ghost. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go back to locomotion and I'm going to go back to this body transform. And what we're going to do is we're going to add something called a character controller. I can either add it here or you can add it as a component by typing in character controller, either one. I like to use the one right from here. And when I do that, notice how it says use character controller and it's checked on, and then it says character controller and it's saying where it placed it. So on my VR headset, you'll notice now there's something called character controller. What this is basically doing is saying this is going to let your object, if I click on it, see how it added this sort of collider here? Now we want to make sure that this is the thing that's going to collide with things. The height is how tall you are in meters. So, 2 meters to feet would be 6.5. That's pretty tall. So if I want this closer to the way I'd be like 1.83 roughly, I think, in meters. The radius is the other thing that you might be concerned with. The radius is this. So the bigger the radius, if I change this to a radius of 1, you can see how the radius sticks out. Why this would matter is, remember, this is the thing that's the collider. So, right now, if an object was right here, I would collide with it even though maybe the camera hasn't really matched up to it yet. So just be careful that when you set up your radius, just be aware that that's kind of, that's kind of, based on. So here you can kind of see, this is kind of why we have the camera offset, because I kind of moved that camera around. So it's right on top of it. All right, now that was a lot of stuff, but I basically have a basic, what we call in VR, an XR rig. I have this object, this kind of, folder, if you will. It has the XR origin script that tells the program that we have this point in space that represents the character. We have this thing that represents all the buttons on my device. We have this thing that basically dictates all the information about the player, who's going into the world. Then I have something that allows my character to move, or it gives the ability for my character to move in general. And then I have this continuous turn, continuous move that lets us move and, using the controllers as opposed to having to do some other action. And then we also have the camera, which is the actual camera and that's being tracked. Okay. And so at the end of this, what we should be able to do is to move through our world. When I preview this, I should be able to use the controller to move around and to rotate. Okay.
All right, all. So I'm inside of the world right now. I have two controllers. You can't see anything yet. Unlike the practice, there's no hands. Eventually, we'll add ray indicators, but we did set up the continuous turn, which is this. So I'm using the right and the left joysticks to rotate my vision. You can also do this manually by turning your head. And I'm using the left controller in this case to move forward, backwards, right, and left. And if you have the character controller on, you should be able to bump into objects. You can see I'm bumping into these trees. So if I try to like walk through this, uh, you know, pyramid, I can't do that. Okay. All right. So that's how that one should look.